서민어 주석 오징어 한리 박대 대사 성주목 방첨 사족의 해운박
Hello, welcome to WTM Virtual. My name is Steve Keenan of Travel Perspective. And this afternoon, I'm talking to two eminent tourism and travel guests, whether we are looking at a smaller travel and tourism industry in the future and what that might look like. Are we going to go back to 2019 levels? If so, when that might be? And how will the demand have changed and morphed in that time? Because I think most people now agree it won't be the same as it was in 2019. There's something fundamental going on here, I think. A lot of us have enjoyed exploring our own backyards this year. Camping, road trip holidays in the UK went off the scale in the summer and into the autumn. Have we shed a little of the guilt of flying? Are some of us rethinking how and where we travel? It ticks a lot of boxes re the big backdrop of climate change. Perhaps the world would be better off if the travel and tourism industry was 25% smaller, say. My guests today are going to explore the issues here, both of whom have a huge vested interest in when and how we start traveling. Nigel Huddleston MP was appointed the Minister for Sport, Tourism, Heritage in February. And prior to entering politics, he had a career in international business with familiarity in tourism, having worked at Google as the UK head of travel. Mark Tanzer has been Chief Executive of Abta since 2005. The Association of British Travel Agents has 1,100 corporate members, comprising tour operators, cruise companies, and travel agents. Abta services include financial bonding to protect consumer money, health and safety support, and dispute resolution. Welcome, Mark. But let's start with a broad perspective of how the travel industry, tourism industry is actually doing at the moment. I'll come to Mark in a minute, but perhaps Nigel, you can kick off with telling us what's going on with inbound tourism to the UK.
Sure. Well, thanks, Steve. And look, there's no doubt we're in a pretty difficult situation. I think earlier on this year, if you go back to January, we're looking forward to a bit of a bumper year. As you mentioned, I'm primarily responsible as Tourism Minister for domestic and inbound, and Mark obviously will cover a lot more outbound. But all three of those sectors are intimately connected, and all of them really valuable to the UK economy and jobs. We're talking about 3 million jobs indirectly sustained by tourism, about 1.6 million directly in the UK, £60 billion of direct GVA, a lot more indirect. We were hoping for about 40-something million inbound visitors. We had 41 million in 2019, and we're also looking at around 100 million domestic tourism visits for the first time as well. So early on this year, we were going to go, wow, this is going to be a fantastic year. And then COVID came along and changed all that. Now, bits of the domestic market have had a decent summer. Certainly what we've been monitoring, we've seen the coastal areas, the countryside areas, in particular self-catering, cottages, so on, do okay with decent and occasionally higher occupancy rates and ADRs than previous years. But we all know the cities have suffered and large parts of the UK have suffered. And we've particularly suffered where we've been exposed to inbound tourism. So in particular, London. And let's not forget that when it comes to total amount spent, about 50% of all inbound tourism is spent within the M25. Now, that's something long-term we need to change. But London has really suffered. Anybody who's come to London over the summer will have just noticed, you see it on the streets. You're not hearing the overseas voices. You're not seeing as many people. Many of the tourist resorts and tourist offerings were either closed still completely or massively reduced volumes, and that goes for all the visitor attractions as well. So difficult times. I won't go into the details of how we've responded, but I think everybody's familiar with the government responses, both the macro ones in terms of the job retention schemes, but also the ones specific for the tourism sector. Compared to other countries, this is always a matter of debate, but we've responded pretty quickly and pretty generously. Programs like Cut That in Tourism was a £4 billion investment in the UK tourism business. grants, business rates relief, and so on. I know they didn't apply everywhere, but large swathes of the tourism, hospitality and leisure sector did get some support, and of course is continuing to get support. But where we go from here, I won't go into it now. This will be a topic of debate now. Obviously, we've still got a lot to do to get the tourism sector back on that track that we were very optimistic about earlier on this year. But I am overall confident we will get there. The sector's had various periods of difficulty in the past. It's always bounced back strongly. It will be a bit different, but not unfamiliar. But I'm very confident it will get back on track. And of course, that's the responsibility of government and the private sector working together.
Okay, thank you for that. Your figures produced by Visit Britain have slightly changed over the last 3 months or so. I think actually they're looking a bit better than they were 3 months ago. But can you give us some idea of how the inbound numbers have fallen off and the domestic traffic in terms of people and also value?
Yeah, well, look, the domestic tourism has fallen, or rather the inbound tourism has fallen by about 90% in terms of inbound flights. I mean, we're talking about absolutely incredible drop-off. And of course, you know, for large swathes of you know, if you look at the top 10 countries that we're, you know, hugely rely on, you know, the US, France, Italy, Spain, Germany, and so on. The demand has fallen massively, as well as Australia and New Zealand, where, you know, international travel to all intents and purposes is effectively banned. So inbound has been really difficult. For a little bit of a period during the summer, you could walk around London and elsewhere and start to hear those overseas voices again and see small groups of tourists coming back, but certainly not the Americans, which we're, in terms of the total revenue, if not total numbers, we're highly reliant on the US. So it's really fallen massively, and then has a huge impact then on major tourist areas, you know, the likes of, you know, think of the spin-on then, Bicester Village, Blenheim Palace, you know, our historic royal palaces, hugely dependent on inbound tourism. Stonehenge, right behind me here, you know, hugely dependent on inbound tourism. So they've been knocked for six to the tune of 80-90%. Domestic tourism, we're still getting the numbers in, so I can't give you the exact right numbers at the moment, but domestic tourism varied massively. Devon, Cornwall, Cumbria, certain other parts of the country did quite well, but the cities, we're still talking about occupancy rates in hotels in cities in single digits in some cases, or even the teens still, whereas in Devon, Cornwall, elsewhere during August, we were up to 70, 80, 90% or so. So a really mixed picture across the country. Actually,
I saw some figures today from PricewaterhouseCoopers. Daily revenues per room in London slumped to £29 in 2020. That's a quarter of what it was at the same time last year. But it's not just overseas tourists, of course. It's business travellers not travelling, and there are no events, so people aren't going into London. So you got that triple whammy in the capital.
Absolutely. And, you know, we were doing really well with business travel and the conference and events sector. And I know it's a sector that's been hit particularly hard, and we're working really closely with them because we need to make sure that's a sector that can come back strong. It's an incredibly internationally competitive industry as well. I mean, events like we're having today in virtual format, World Travel Market, vital to our tourism economy. The knock-on impact of having WTM in London is huge. You know, the pubs, bars, restaurants, hotels, and then people often tag on a leisure trip onto their business trip. But let's not forget that. So events and conferences are really, really, really important, and we want to make sure that we're in a good position when they can come back.
Yeah, I live in North Dorset now, and that's an area which has benefited, I think, hugely this year. What's interesting to see is how many you changed the rules, not you personally, possibly the government changed the rules to allow 56 days without a license to have pop-up tents, camping, that sort of stuff. We've had a half a dozen new camping companies set up around Shaftesbury. The number of day trips we've had into the region has been colossal. That, as you will find out in the figures to come, is really interesting how that's starting to, well, people responding to the fact they couldn't get abroad.
Yeah, and, you know, it's difficult to say there's a silver lining in this horrible crisis that we're facing. But one thing that we are seeing, and some of the surveys come back and suggest that people who maybe haven't had a domestic holiday in a while have actually been forced to spend their summers in, you know, somewhere in the UK rather than, you know, Spain, Italy, France, and so on. And invariably, they've had a really, really good experience. and are like, you know what, actually this ain't bad, you know, I'll do this again. Now maybe they'll go back to Mallorca or Sicily, whatever, for their summer holiday next year or the year after. But the great thing is it's a good signal that maybe in the shoulder season we'll be able to exploit this positive experience people have had. And we're not going to forget that. You know, we do need to make sure we focus on the marketing and the spend around that to make sure that the domestic market is still strong.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I'd like to bring in Mark from Abta at this point. Mark, you've heard what the minister has to say there. Is there anything you'd like to say initially in response to his comments?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So Abta's members, as you rightly said, specialise in outbound travel, but we also do an awful lot of domestic travel. We probably have the biggest domestic tour operators as well, and business travel. But if I can just give particularly the outbound story of the last year, it very much reflects what the minister's just said about inbound travel. So, you know, volumes are down 90%, 85, 90% on a year-on-year basis. And if we go back to, you know, the beginning of COVID, so February, March this year, travel was really the first area to be hit with shutdown. I mean, if you remember, it was cruise, then it was areas of northern Italy, then it was basically everywhere else was closed. And of course, for the travel industry, that triggers a big operational exercise in bringing people back, is the first thing, where holidays are cancelled, but also refunds. And so, you know, the story of the last 6 months in many ways has been trying to get money back to customers who had booked for holidays that were no longer able to take place. So that's put sort of a financial strain on the industry. Plus, of course, there haven't been any new bookings coming in. So it's really put the travel industry in a very difficult cash squeeze, I'd say.
Sorry, Mark, can I just interject? I heard on the radio last night, Ryanair saying they paid all their refunds all the way through to July now. Is it still an issue that companies are not refunding from back in sort of April, May, June, July period?
There are still refunds outstanding. So the airlines have one set of regulations about refunds, and then package organisers have another set of regulations about them. And there are different timeframes for paying it. But I think it's true to say that, you know, when you have effectively a global shutdown simultaneously, the regulations weren't able to cope with the speed with which the regulations said you should give refunds just wasn't deliverable. So companies have issued what we call refund credit notes, effectively a deferred refund, which is still protected either by the government or by Abta, to give customers confidence they could accept that. But it has been it's been a long saga, and there are people who have been waiting for their money for quite a few months. So I think it has been an extremely difficult period. At Abta, we've had more than 20 companies have failed, very sadly, including some very well-known established names, Shearings, Cruise and Maritime, STA, many of us will remember from their student days, have all very sadly failed. The fear is there may be more to come.
Is there, on that point again, sorry to interject, is there a theme there of the type of company that's failing, or is it right across the board?
It's across the board. You know, we've had cruise company, travel agents, tour operators. You're more vulnerable if you're in a particular niche. There are a couple. So cruise is banned really for the moment by Public Health England, that you cannot sell cruises. Similarly, school travel. So if you're a company that only does school travel and you're not allowed to do it, then obviously you're in a doubly precarious situation. There were glimmers, as the market started to reopen in the summer, that we might get a late summer and a winter, but of course that's closed down again because of the progress of the virus. And as we all know, we're now in effectively another lockdown ban on international travel. So it has been, without doubt, the biggest crisis to hit the travel industry in many, many years and generations. And we have appreciated the support we've had from government. With the minister personally, I've had very good access, been able to present the detailed information about the plight of the sector. Of course, we haven't had all the support we'd like, but there's no doubt the furlough scheme was taken up by a very large number of travel companies and other business support measures. I think as a sector, and I think more broadly than tour operators and travel agents, but the whole aviation sector, including airports and all of the supply chains that feed into those, we do need targeted support. I think not just because we are a big employer and economic contributor, as the minister said, but it is a strategic asset. You know, our connectivity, when we were looking at Heathrow expansion or Brexit discussions, was one of the main strategic planks of our future. You know, to be a hub, to be connected, to be open for business. And I am concerned that, you know, if we don't have effectively a rescue plan over the winter, we might see long-term damage done to what is a national asset.
Don't you think it's, I mean, the minister mentioned the number of jobs, something like 3-4 million connected to the travel and tourism industry. Isn't it inevitable that more jobs will go, not because furlough is being maintained till to March, which is just fantastic, but there isn't going to be any business for travel and tourism over the winter. How do those travel agents continue? Is it just, they still got fixed overcosts, fixed heads?
Yeah, well, I agree, Steve, and I think that is why I'm afraid we may see more failures. I mean, it is a, you know, it's tourism. It is a resilient industry, and they've done everything they can to try and get in shape. But you can only go on so long living on thin air without cash coming in. And the problem, you know, one of the difficulties we have with the furlough structure is that it means employees can't be working, whereas actually a lot of travel agencies need employees in to pay refunds, to take bookings for the future where the money may not be coming in now. So the furlough scheme doesn't quite meet their needs, and what we need is a more flexible version of that. And we've been writing to the Chancellor to make those arguments. In
a nutshell, what are you looking for?
Well, direct grant support, I think, for the sector. I mean, how that's structured, we can discuss, but I think, and I know there must be a long queue of industrial sectors who are outside the Chancellor's door saying we are very important and we need support. I think, you know, what the Chancellor said about the hospitality sector, which is it's being closed because of government health policy, is true of the travel sector. It has been closed. I mean, there is no business to be done because you cannot travel. And I think the same logic that applies to hospitality should also apply to international travel.
Okay. Nigel, if I can bring you back in, you've heard what Mark has said there. You have set up, where is it? The name of your group, the Global Travel Workforce, about testing protocols. What progress are we making on developments which help movement of people?
Yeah, well, that task force has been set up, and it will be reporting into the Prime Minister imminently, actually, with a whole series of recommendations, including relating to testing, as well as non-testing measures. And actually, thanks to Mark and actually the sector for participating in that task force and putting ideas forward. I have to say, actually, the degree of engagement we've had with industry has been phenomenal throughout this crisis, and it's been really important as well because things move so quickly. We've needed real-time data and information from the private sector and from industry bodies to say, look, what's going on? Because if we waited for ONS data and 3 months for data to come in, we'd be behind. So actually, I would say, first of all, thank you for the sector for the incredible engagement we've had on that task force as well as others. I can't preempt what the decisions or outcomes will be, but I know that the Secretary of State for Transport has committed to making sure that we take appropriate actions from it. And of course, ultimately, it will be decided on by the Prime Minister. We've also got a relatively new Aviation Minister, Rob Courts, who I speak to frequently, as I know does Mark and others on this call. And again, the door's open there. So Mark's right. There's a lot of asks, a lot of requests coming in from industry. Look, I'm well aware. Government can't do everything that everybody asks, and we won't be able to save every single job. The Chancellor said that very, very clearly. But actually, we're trying as hard as we can, and thanks to the input from the sector, to make sure that we try and make decisions with the most up-to-date information possible. I say I'm interested myself to see what the outcome of the task force is. Of course, we've got the current corridors in place, but I know there's a lot of asks to see if we can change and look at that as well. We are in a situation where it's not just the UK, but other parts of Europe and indeed around the world that's had a surge in infections. So at this moment in time now is a difficult time to ask for an easing of restrictions. But I think it's reasonable and fair for the industry to say, look, when we look towards when we can open, can we really make sure that we go all guns blazing?
And how long's a piece of string? I mean, the thing about who's closed, who's open, it changes on such a frequent basis now I have no idea.
Well, it does, and I have to say, you know, I get this all the time, both as a constituency MP and other things. And I get, you know, we're in really unprecedented circumstances. Nobody has a crystal ball, but I make no apologies for the fact that when the data and the information changes, then so should the policies. So, you know, if we kind of dragged our feet and we were seeing a massive surge in one country and then said, oh, let's just wait a bit and see, then we'd get criticised for not moving so quickly. So I do understand and appreciate, and it causes massive inconvenience to large numbers of people, both companies and consumers, when we make changes in policy, particularly impacting their holidays and the things that they've been looking forward to. You know, I absolutely get that. But we're trying to do the right thing, because at the end of the day, still, let's not forget, this is still in the context of a horrible disease that is killing people. And, you know, we've got to try and make the right decisions based on that. And when the information changes, then so will the policy, and it will change again very quickly, you know, at some point. And if we didn't do that, I think we'd be open to criticism as well.
Okay. Mark, would you like to respond to that? Are you okay?
Well, no, I agree with the principles that the Minister says. And I think what we have been arguing for is a more regionalised approach to these health restrictions. We've obviously got that in the UK. We had, you know, pre the lockdown, we had the ability to identify specific areas with high infection rates and apply a different set of criteria to them. And I think we need to do the same internationally. I was pleased to see the end of last week, the Foreign Office moving away from global travel advisories to country specific, which is a step in the right direction. And also, you know, the week before that, where they announced that the Canary Islands would have a different set of restrictions to mainland Spain. So I think we need to, as we come out of lockdown, really be able to identify specific areas and only put restrictions in place where there are high infection rates and not on a whole country basis.
Well, as you say, lockdown just December the 2nd, so TUI's not selling any holidays, Ryanair's not, so it's not going to be an issue until December again. How quickly has tour operators and travel agents managed to stay up to speed with where they can sell their holidays for quite often narrow periods of time? Have they become very adept at that?
Yes, but they always have been. I mean, you know, we've lived with Foreign Office advice and advice against travel for many years, so we're quite used to you know, repatriation, redirecting, rebooking customers to other destinations and so forth. Of course, the scale of this is unprecedented, but in its nature, it's not that different. And you know, one of the virtues of tour operating and travel agents is that you can point the planes or the ships in a different direction and go to up to a point, you know, different areas. But if the whole world is shut down through a global travel advisory, then of course you've got absolutely nowhere to go. So we are, you know, we're very much you know, looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, if I can put it like that. We've obviously had some positive news about the testing in Liverpool, which could help rapid testing identify people who are infectious. And then on the news today at lunchtime, you know, very optimistic and positive news about a possible vaccine. And so we really hang on that.
Sure.
You know, our consumer research shows that, you know, apart from the, you know, the physical constraints of travel, customer confidence is a big constraint. And I think overcoming these obstacles, whether it's less onerous quarantine restrictions on people coming back or a vaccine or better testing, will all help to build people's confidence to book for next year.
Indeed. I very much agree with you on that, how to reduce the stress of getting through airports, the whole airline process, how good the airline is at managing people. It's possibly going to become a factor in who you choose to go with as well in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a very important part of your holiday experience. You know, the transit through the airports and at the other end is shows it has a big psychological impact on whether you've had a good trip or not. And you know, the airports do a fantastic job at funneling, you know, millions of people going out and coming back.
Yeah.
Sticking you know, any kind of medical testing facility in the middle of that is not straightforward. So in addition to the you know, the testing work that's being done through the Global Travel Task Force, we also need to think, how is that going to work logistically for customers before or after they return from their travel?
But okay, all good points. It's interesting to see a survey today from YouGov asking millions of people across the world about their intended travel plans, which again will just change on an almost daily basis. But they estimate in the next 12 months, 52% of UK people will want to have a holiday domestically and only 27% internationally. Does that surprise you both, Nigel?
It doesn't necessarily surprise me at the moment. I mean, as you said, these numbers go up and down quite quickly because consumer confidence goes up and down, both domestic and international travel, based on the latest available data. So it was looking a lot more positive a few weeks ago before we went into this latest lockdown and saw the resurgence in coronavirus infection rates across Europe. So it doesn't surprise me. But I would say at heart, Mark will correct me on the numbers here, but I said earlier on we had 40 million inbound visitors. I think it was over 60 million outbound as well. Brits travel a lot. We love traveling, and huge credit to the sector as well, because when we went into lockdown, there were something like 1.3 million Brits overseas. That's like 2% of the population. That is a real outlier compared to most other parts in the world, and actually was one of the challenges we had, getting the lockdown happening straight away, of course, because millions of Brits, or well over 1 million Brits, need to come in from overseas. So we're on a different, we operate on a very different scale to many other countries, because we love traveling. We love welcoming travelers, and we love traveling abroad ourselves. So, but what is really important then is when we do travel, again, that we can do so confidently. I would say actually the sector's done an incredible job actually over the last few months, both domestically and internationally, to give people confidence that when they're traveling, whether it's going to a domestic hotel or going through an airport or being on a plane, actually most of the research I've seen suggests that people were a bit afraid of doing it, but when they did it, they were like, oh, actually, I can really see that they're taking their responsibilities really seriously. And actually, they're much more comforted having had one travel experience, and it makes them more inclined to do another. So look, I'm in no doubt that when we can start traveling again, the measures will come back even stronger or as appropriate. And actually people can be confident that people can travel safely. There's no such thing as risk-free travel. We can never guarantee 100%, but everybody is trying the best they can to minimize risk. Actually, I'm seeing that across the board, every sector, whether it's airline, hotel, visitor attraction, bar, pub or restaurant. Actually, the commitment to try and make sure the customer experience, and indeed the employee experience, is a safe one, is absolutely there. I'm really proud of the UK for doing all the measures that they've taken, actually.
Yeah, and on that YouGov survey, it's not the industry, it's the consumers themselves who are trying to make it risk-free. Because I saw in the top 10 of their destinations, the UK is still top of their list for next year for a domestic holiday. But in the top 10 was also Austria, Canada and Iceland as destinations they'd like to go to. Safe destinations. Becoming a lot of that feel about traveling is we do like to travel, but we do want to be safe in this current climate. And that's going to take quite a while to wear off, if it does. Do you think it will be the case that is it a short-term effect of we want to go there to be safe, but we'll go back to our normal way of traveling in the future? Big question.
Well, Mark and I will respond a lot to this, but I'll just say very quickly, I think there's going to be some perennial favourites. I think people will be dying to get back to Mallorca and Corfu and places as soon as they can. But if this means that we'll have some adaptations and some changes and some new destinations come on board, that's the natural evolution of the travel and tourism sector. But actually, I think we'll have some changes, but I don't think actually, both either on domestic or global, that it's going to be that different from where we were 2 or 3 years ago, actually.
Really? Mark, what's your take?
Well, I think I agree with the Minister in the medium term, and I don't think that domestic and international are substitute products. I mean, at the edge, they may be some people who make a choice one or the other. I'm talking in a non-COVID world, but actually they're very different experiences. You can do both. They appeal to different market segments. We've never in the UK built the mass tourism infrastructure that they have in the Mediterranean. So even if everybody wanted to take a family holiday in the UK, it would be quite expensive for them to do that. And of course, we don't have the climate in the summer either. So I think there are all sorts of natural reasons why international travel will resume. It may be, as the Minister said, different in some of the detail and the aspects, but I think the fundamental appetite is still very strong. And certainly our consumer research says that people are looking forward to traveling next year. It goes against the YouGov poll, and it says they're going to spend more than they would normally have done because they didn't spend the money this year. So, they're not spending it on consumer goods. They would like holiday, they like travel, and they want to be able to kind of start that up again.
There is obviously the backdrop of climate change, which is it's not it's not an issue, as I heard one Dorset holiday park operator describing as, it's it's not going to go away this year, this issue. No, it's not. It's going to be there. We do like to travel, but we like to travel a lot, and we like to take an awful lot of trips based on cheapness, or the fact that the third or fourth holidays. That's what I think I'm driving at. It's the necessity to travel as much as we have done in the past in the future. Do you think that would still be the same?
Well, I think before COVID was ever even heard of, the biggest challenge I think that the industry was facing strategically was climate change and sustainability, not just carbon reduction, but waste, the social impact of tourism in destination and so forth. Wow. And when we had our convention last year, 12 months ago, it was the main topic of conversation and the discussion. And there was a real sense of the industry has waked to this and is doing practical things to be able to continue to do the good things that travel does, while minimizing the social and sociological impacts and environmental impacts of tourism. Those challenges haven't gone away. I am confident that there is a route through this that will enable travel to keep people moving. I think it's important for people's psychological well-being, and it's become almost a human right. And I think it would be doubly sad if travel became just a luxury for the rich people and denied to the broader population. And of course, we've learned many lessons in COVID, but one of them is the importance of travel and tourism, because the 10% of the world that is employed in travel and tourism isn't working. And that is a huge impact on the destinations. It's an impact in the UK, but multiply that across all the economies of the world, and some of them are much more dependent on tourism than ours. And I think the absence of it has really brought home to people that it has a role to play. If you read, the UN sustainability goals start with reduce poverty, and for a lot of areas in the world, the way they reduce poverty is by jobs, and those jobs are tourist jobs. And we need to bear that in mind as we balance, the environmental issues that we need to deal with. But I'm confident that, together with the government, we can, as an industry, meet those challenges.
Okay, Nigel, travel, I don't think anybody disagrees, is necessary. We don't want to stay where we are, but that much travel we've done in the past, fewer flights, would that be helpful to how people feel as well? And they want to help save the planet, but they also want to enjoy themselves. So are we going back to the volume of travel we did beforehand, or would you see it naturally decreasing a little?
I think this is a really important debate, not only for the travel sector, but for the wider economy, because this debate is often presented, and I mentioned this on a previous panel, so sorry if people have heard it before, but I think this debate is sometimes presented as, economic growth or environmental protection, choose one. It's not as simple as that. And as Mark alluded to as well, particularly when we look to emerging economies around the world, where tourism is really important to their economic growth, are we seriously saying, actually, we've had our economic growth, thanks very much, in the West, you can't have yours because we're going to restrict your economic growth activities, including tourism? No, we're not. And also, though, we have seen huge strides in the tourism sector in terms of its environmental responsibilities, whether that's the fuel economy and environmentally better planes, to hoteliers and others in the supply chain reducing their carbon emissions and restricting or eliminating the use of one-off plastics and all of those kind of things. Actually, the sector's led the way in some ways and done a pretty good job, and that's because consumers do demand it. So I think people will still want to go on holiday. They would like to believe that they're doing so whilst minimizing their environmental footprint and not doing the environmental damage, because there is much greater awareness in the public psyche than there was a few years ago. Some people are willing to pay a little bit more for that, others not. But I don't think we should send the message out that if you want to travel, it's going to come at a significantly higher cost, because there are ways that we can all, both in public and private sector, reduce costs and take our responsibilities just in terms of the way that we behave. So I know the kind of premise of this question, should we have 25% smaller tourism sector, I would say no. I think that would be bad for jobs, and also I don't think it's necessary, because we can make environmental improvements at the same time as growing the economy and still travelling. But we just need to be far more sensitive than we were in the past.
Well, you won't be surprised to hear the questions coming in. No one is addressing the issue of sustainability, the elephant in the room, sustainability, climate change. There is still a lot of feeling out there.
Yeah, there is. And look, as a constituency MP, I get this in my mailbag all the time. But there's things that we can do as individuals as well, whether it's carbon offsetting or, as I say, just being a bit more careful in the way that we travel and use of plastics and all sorts of things. And I say there's 2 or 3 aspects to this conversation, but I genuinely believe that we can work together. And I know there's tax incentives in terms of fuel and all sorts of things, that levers that the government could pull. But actually, we are moving in the right direction. I mean, let's not forget the UK economy has grown significantly over the last 20 years, whilst reducing its carbon emissions massively, whilst recycling more than ever before, whilst massively reducing use of plastics. So we can actually make progress, and certainly. I say both in the travel and tourism sector, but on the wider economy. This is a really important topic. No politician is unsensitive to or unaware of these issues. Our constituents demand it. But I was to say, it's not always as simple as black or white. The environment or the economy. You can have both.
Indeed. Now going back to the sort of domestic tourism, that your Visit Britain launched Escape the Everyday campaign in September, obviously possibly cut short a bit by lockdown, but it was hoping to generate 200,000 additional domestic overnight trips in the UK. Any early figures on that?
We're still evaluating those. We had 2 campaigns, actually. There was the Enjoy Summer Safely campaign, and then the Escape the Everyday campaigns, which actually will be brought back as soon as we're able to do so. It's very difficult to tie exactly, cause and effect, but certainly in terms of social media interaction, TV, advert awareness, and so on, it was pretty high. And then we kind of joined that along with the kind of good to go kite mark that the industry also spread out, and it sent the message out pretty clearly. And actually, the awareness levels were impressive. So we'll have to crunch the numbers before we say exactly what the economic impact of those things was, but certainly the awareness was really good.
Okay, probably too early to ask again, but a question come in: what is the government planning to do to help promote inbound tourism again when people can start travelling again?
Well, on that, and again, we've got obviously the spend that we do through the Great campaign. You've got the adverts behind me here promoting our tourism, our heritage sites, our sporting and other assets. We'll be getting that up and running to our key markets as soon as we're able to do so again. So that's the broader Great campaign, as well as other direct international marketing activities. So we'll be going very heavily on that. And as I mentioned earlier as well, things like conferences and events, we're working with the sector to get them going, because they bring in not only business travel, but are hugely beneficial for tourism as well. So continuing to work with the sector on that, on those areas, so there'll be direct and indirect government spending.
But do you think it's always been very difficult to get people out of London. As you say, 50% of people stay within the M25, and you can kick them and suggest all sorts of things. They stay there because we all want to see New York or Paris. We don't necessarily want to, well, we may do in the future. So will there be a change of emphasis, do you think? Again, I appreciate I'm asking you something in the middle of a crisis, which isn't going to happen until next spring in the earliest.
Well, we are working on a tourism recovery plan with the Tourism Industry Council, which has been fantastic, actually. The various bodies and groups. We've had a visitor economy working group, the TIER group, Visit Britain, Visit England have promoted so many initiatives to get information fed in and lots of ideas. Yeah, I'm fairly confident we'll move in the right direction there pretty soon. Yeah.
And we're still talking 2024. Before we see numbers back to 2019 is the latest Visit Britain estimate?
That's the latest estimate. Wouldn't it be great if we can achieve that earlier? But those will be the focus. As I said, we're working on the recovery plan, and all ideas welcome. It involves some things as normal, the promotion and marketing campaigns, but also some new ideas as well to try and get the the tourism economy moving. I mean, I would say one thing, that, you know, politicians talk more about tourism and hospitality and leisure now than they ever did before. If you just look at the debates in Parliament, the questions to the Prime Minister, everything like that, you know, people do recognise, MPs now recognise the importance of tourism to their constituency and the local economy more than ever before. And I say, you know, in direct answer to your London question as well, sorry, you know, it's not a matter of going somewhere else instead of London, it's come to London and go somewhere else as well. So focusing on things like the average length of stay is really important. You know, other countries have a slightly higher average length of stay than we do. We need to work on that as well. And we've got lots of people to do and see. So we just need to make sure that they come to London and get out of London as well.
Yeah. Mark, when it comes to travel agents selling the UK, it's always been the case that there's not a lot of commissionable product that's packaged there that they can sell themselves. We tend to book it all ourselves directly with the hotel or the car hire or whatever it may be. Is there any way, do you think, that the travel agents in the UK who are impacted can package more stuff themselves, or do you encourage outbound tour operators like Kuoni to offer more UK product themselves? What do you think?
Well, I think there has always been a market for UK package holidays sold by UK tour operators and through the travel agencies.
It tends to be coach trips or something of that nature.
I beg your pardon?
Sorry, it tends to be coach trips or something of that nature.
Yeah, but you know, that's business. You know, if people are coming down to London, you know, for a weekend and a theatre ticket, then that's you know, that's package holiday as well. So there's always been commissionable product there for travel agents to sell. Of course, you're quite right. It is easier. People have more confidence in booking themselves within the United Kingdom. You don't have the same issue of repatriation if something goes wrong. So, you know, the further away you get from the UK, the more people will look to a professional travel organizer to help them. And I think that's natural. But I think there are plenty of opportunities within the UK for sort of creative tour operators and travel agents to be able to sort of build on the initiatives that the minister's just outlined.
Is that something that you can assist your members on, to suggest it, or get a think tank going? I think
well, we do. We have an industry group that is specifically focused, brings together Abta members, focused particularly on promoting and developing UK tour operating, domestic tour operations, and promoting that to the travel agents.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, we need, you know, of course, as I say, necessity is the mother of invention, and maybe, you know, we'll see more creative sort of holidays within the UK coming out of COVID. That will be a new opportunity for that market.
Okay, just a couple of questions coming in. A lot of it, as I mentioned, is talking about sustainability, talking about travel corridors. Are they the future of travel? One for you, Mark. Do you think travel agents have closed because of the refund fiasco, going back a bit, as they were in debt to customers, didn't get the money, pipeline monies back into the agencies quick enough? And also, do you think the government has failed the travel sector as more and more companies have closed over the winter period? We sort of covered that, but any other thought on that? Did travel agents close because they didn't have the refunds?
Well, I think, you know, to the uninitiated, there are different obligations on tour operators who package holidays, and airlines, you know, which is part of that, and then travel agents who sell, you know, those package arrangements. So the refund, if a package holiday is cancelled, is due from the tour operator to the customer. Now that may go through the travel agent who has the relationship, but it's not actually coming directly from the travel agent's own funds. They may choose to refund in advance out of customer relations, but actually the obligation is on the package organizer. But I think what, you know, we've learned a lot of lessons out of COVID, and painful, a lot of them, painfully learned. But one of them is that, you know, an apparently straightforward holiday, you know, if I can put it like that, let's call it a beach holiday in Spain, is actually quite a complex thing to put together. It has a lot of different component parts, from the hotel, the airline, package organizer, the travel agent. And when the music stops in the way it has with COVID, you find out pretty quickly where the money is, who owes money to whom. And I think, you know, the customers are going to be much more aware of, you know, that aspect of when they buy a holiday. You know, is it protected? You know, what happens if we have another pandemic, or if something happens to interrupt my holiday, will I get my money back? I think the general level of consciousness, you call it a refund fiasco, but actually it's the industry has been working. You know, customers who bought a package holiday will get their money back, and that is a very strong selling point for organised travel and for the package holiday industry. Whereas if they booked it on their own, they wouldn't get their money back, and they wouldn't have any of the other support that you need in getting back. So ironically, and now is not the time to sort of blow the trumpet for what a great job the travel industry does. Coming out of this, I think you will have a heightened consumer appreciation of why you book with travel organisers, particularly when you're travelling overseas.
I haven't read this story for a while, but there were COVID insurance policies coming out as well as a result of the situation. Is that quite standard these days? Are there quite competitive, comprehensive insurance policies?
Well, I mean,
recreation?
It is coming back slowly, but this is for cover if you contract COVID when you're overseas. It does not give you cover for a cancellation because you've got COVID before you go. And I think
hospital costs abroad and repatriation.
Exactly. So it's basically the health aspects of it if you're overseas are increasingly covered. At one point, there wasn't any cover at all, but I think customers are still worried about what happens if I book a holiday on my own and then I can't travel because of COVID.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is coming in. Somebody saying only 17% of operators are confident about the next 12 months. 60% fear their business will be unable to survive the crisis. And I did note, it's possibly one for you, Nigel. UK Inbound, I'm sure you know the body well, has submitted a proposal to the Treasury, which would see tour operators and DMCs, destination management companies, able to apply for a capped grant award fund, which is what I think Mark was referring to earlier as well, or a grant fund, based on the level of turnover lost in 2020 and forecast operating costs. Is that something you're aware of, Nigel, or something you can comment on?
Yeah, I certainly am. Joss, the whole team, and actually nearly every single one of the industry bodies and organisations have submitted all sorts of ideas formally through Tourism Industry Council or to the Chancellor and copied me in. So I see lots of really good ideas. I'm afraid I don't hold the Chancellor's purse strings all the time, but I'm constantly going to the Treasury with ideas. Now, as Mark suggested earlier on, which I appreciate, so is every other minister for every single other sector. And actually, let's be aware that this sector has received, the general all economy grants as well as a few others as well. And I say let's not forget that that in tourism was a £4 billion initiative. Which are more than that. Now it's been extended to March. So the sector's got quite a few things that it's asked for, but I'm aware not everything. And as I said, genuinely, all ideas and suggestions welcome. And we all can constantly review and see what we can do. And the Treasury is open to ideas. We've seen that they've been creative. Things like the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. On that kind of scale, never done anywhere else in the world. So the Treasury is quite open to ideas. So always happy to submit, always happy to talk, but can't promise they'll all happen. Can I just say one other thing as well, just related to what Mark just said there about the package holidays? I do agree with him, actually. I think the value proposition of a package holiday or tour operator organised holiday is more compelling now than it probably was, or recognised as more compelling than a couple of years ago. So I'd be quite optimistic about that sector actually going forward as well. And certainly that's the feedback I'm getting from constituents, for example, talking about planning their holidays over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's always been a truism that you don't mind organising a weekend to London or to Paris, but if it's a big family holiday or a big anniversary, then you are going to trust the professionals to get it right and bring you back safely. Questions come in, not necessarily related to what we've been talking about, but I'll be interested in your response to this. I'm hearing a lot from B&B operators in the UK who are struggling massively because nobody wants to stay in a shared house with people. They want to be out on the road or in a tree house somewhere in mid-Wales. But how can travel agents selling UK compete with Airbnb, as it will always be cheaper going direct, and they're not bound by the conditions of health and safety that B&Bs are under? Question from left field, sorry.
Well, look, I'll kick off here, and I know Mark's probably got an idea. I recognise the particularly acute situation with B&Bs, and in terms of the financial support from government, some of them fell through the gaps earlier in the year, and then we ended up adding a discretionary local government element to it. So many of them did end up getting some of the tourism, hospitality, and leisure, and retail hospitality and leisure grants in the end, either directly or indirectly. There is a real a challenge for them, but also I would say it goes back to that point when somebody's been to a B and experienced what they're doing. The measures been put in place to protect customers has been pretty impressive, and I think that will be built on as well. They're great. The UK is well known for its fantastic world-class B&Bs, and we will get back there, but I do recognise the struggles. So like every element of the sector, I would say take full advantage of all the schemes that are out there and available, including the extension to the furlough scheme, because I'm confident we'll get back to growth in our domestic and international tourism again pretty soon. But in the meantime, take advantage of all those challenges. And then in terms of creating the level playing field, we're constantly looking at that. The online world has brought in some challenges as well as opportunities, but the arguments about a level playing field are fair ones, and certainly, we're constantly reviewing those issues.
Okay, I'll come to you in a sec, but another question, Justin. I'm not aware of this, and you can tell me, Nigel, whether it's the case. Question is, what is Nigel's take on the removal of tax-free shopping from 31st of December, which will massively impact inbound high-spending long-haul visitors? Is that the case, that the tax-free shopping is going there? I suppose that's Brexit, is it, or not?
Well, yes, to a large degree, and also, I'm afraid this is a Treasury decision, so I'm not going to step on the Chancellor's toes here. But I'm aware of the concerns expressed by industry, and we've passed those on to the Treasury. This is a challenge, I know, and impacts certain segments more than others. But as we leave the European Union, it has certain implications in terms of how we treat the rest of the world, as well as the EU. But yes, had quite a few representations on this issue, I can assure you of that.
We're certainly aware of it now. Mark, back over to you. So, how do you see Abta's role now going through the winter? Support, help and mediation, legal disputes is part of your portfolio. Is there anything in particular that you see Abta working towards, or a single purpose going into next spring?
Well, our goal is to make sure that we give as much possible support to our members to get through what is going to be a very difficult few weeks and possibly months. We do, as you said, a wide range of things to do that. So we work, for instance, very closely with destinations around their health policies, conveying information back to the Foreign Office or FCDO, so they've got real up-to-date information, not just about infection rates, but also about measures being put in place in destination, so that we are making the most accurate regionalized decisions as we come out of this. We are dealing with a huge number of customer claims. So Abta itself is part of the financial protection mechanism. So where companies fail, we are responsible for paying those claims. So doing that effectively and quickly is really important to maintain consumer confidence. And of course, keeping the pressure up on the government in terms of the impact of COVID on the sector, the potential job losses which are happening sort of on a weekly basis, and continuing to keep up the pressure for as much support for this sector as we can. So I'd say those are our priorities, but we are also looking to the medium term. I mean, I mentioned sustainability. I think there'll be other lessons coming out of this. I think, it's exposed, as I mentioned, some deficiencies in the whole system of financial protection that weren't able to cope with a COVID pandemic situation. So we need to look at that together with the government departments to come up with a system that balances the risks between the customers and the tour operators, but also the costs, that we don't want to overburden the cost of a holiday with masses of protection that is a response to a crisis, but actually is thankfully quite a rare event. So we've got a lot of work to do in the short term, but also in the medium term, thinking about the future shape and regulations for the industry.
Okay, And Nigel, we've covered a lot of ground in the last 55 minutes. A lot of issues to talk about, but same principle really. There's a question to Mark is, while you're grappling with the flames that are all around us and the travel industry, looking forward to a very tough winter and the rise in domestic travel and so on, what's your single beacon that you're working towards for next spring and possibly a vaccine?
Yeah, well, there's kind of three strands to the policy really at the moment. One is protect those businesses that are unable to open or have had massively reduced demand through measures like the furlough scheme and elsewhere. And of course, in the travel, broader hospitality, leisure sector, certainly under the current restrictions till the 2nd December, that's a lot of them, nearly all of them. So make sure that those measures in place. Secondly, then, look towards reopening and making sure that we can reopen safely. So again, work with the sector as we did before to make sure that they can open as quickly and easily as possible. And then thirdly, when they do open, how can they open profitably? And that involves things like looking at taxation levels as well as making sure we help with support so we can stimulate demand. So that will all be part of the immediate tourism recovery plan. And then longer term, work with the sector again for a whole variety of measures to see what else we can do. But as I said, the positive thing I can say is that I genuinely believe that the voice of tourism has never been louder in government. And believe me, don't confuse loud with shouty. Politicians will tell you somebody loud and shouty is not necessarily the way to get things done, but that's not the way that this sector operates. They're loud. They're louder now than they've ever been, and their voice is heard greater than they've ever been. But it's a very articulate, very sensible, very well thought out voice that we're hearing. And I really do genuinely appreciate the sector's involvement and engagement for making that. It helps me make my arguments internally within government much better if I'm presented with reasonable, sensible voices based on evidence and saying, look, we need this. And I have to say the sector's been very impressive with the way that they've engaged over the last few months. As Mark said, won't get everything that we want. No sector will, but we're making progress, and I really do appreciate the engagement.
Okay, thanks for that. You mentioned in there taxation levels. Is that something being actively looked at just for this sector or across whole of industry?
Well, as I said, some of it, let's not forget, things like VAT has been extended now through to next year, so through to March. I know there's long, strong calls to say, let's extend that forever and ever. The Chancellor has been pretty clear that this is a temporary measure, but it's something that the sector's been demanded for a while and then was delivered because there was recognition that there would be beneficial upsides to it. So again, it goes back to that presenting a strong argument with credible rationale. And then there's other issues, as I said, the rates and rent and so on have been looked at very carefully. But whatever lever the government can pull, we'll look at very carefully. I say not just for this sector as well, but particularly we've seen a few surprises. I think I don't think the sector was necessarily expecting the VAT cut. I know that they were very vocal in wanting it, and I know when it was delivered, it was a surprise to certain numbers of the members of the sector. But it showed that we listened, and as the Chancellor said, he's always open to ideas.
And were you referring to any other taxation level sources then to be looked at?
Well, look, I'd said, look, anything is always looked at. It's always a matter for the Treasury. But we recognise that in order for a business to be profitable, it's looking at the demand as well as the cost side of the equation. And for businesses, taxation's a cost. So, no, I'm afraid I'm not going to give you the scoop of unilaterally declaring the budget measures or anything else here. But I can say, look, those are the things that we constantly look at, though.
Okay. Yeah. One last question to you. If you were still at Google as head of travel, what would you be doing in this crisis right now?
Actually, one of the tricks is just constantly engage with your customers. And one thing that we know about, particularly the domestic tourism business, is there's a lot of loyalty and people often go back again and again and again to the places that they love. And I think making sure that you engage with your customers so that you can get them to come back, make sure you communicate the measures that are in place so they can go on holiday safely is pretty important. And actually, we've seen a huge surge in demand. Actually, right behind me, I've got, a picture of Stonehenge. showcasing heritage attractions. Not everybody's been able to get out and about, but what we've seen is huge surges in things like visuals and videos and optics for destinations, whether that's holiday resorts and or destinations and attractions has been key. And then I would probably say a bit, Mark was alluding to this, and we've talked about this a bit as well, the collaboration, the packaging, the building together. Who can you look around with that you can, build a package together and make your offering even more compelling, I would say would be something that I would be focusing on if I was talking to my old clients. Yeah.
Mark, then I'll give you the final word. What Nigel mentioned there is very important, the personal touch, the customer service. Cooni, I remember, said during the height of the crisis, they put together a team of people to talk to people directly about refunds and whether they wanted to keep their holidays for next year. And they managed to retain something like 73% of customers for next year. Travel agents clearly have a massive role to play in that exchange of information and confidence as well going into next year.
Completely agree. And you tend not to hear about those stories of the number of loyal customers who have rebooked and then rebooked when the second booking was also stopped because of a lockdown. And there is a huge amount of kind of respect and loyalty in the sector. Of course, I'm not diminishing the refund issue and customers who want their money back, and I can understand how angry they are. But an extraordinary number of customers have worked with their tour organisers and are going to be booking again with them in the future. Great.
Mark and Nigel, thank you so much for your time. We covered a lot today. I don't think I got my answer about the industry being 25% smaller, but perhaps we can talk about that in a year's time. Thanks again for your time, and thank you for everybody for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.